Welcome to Coruzant Technologies, home of the Digital Executive Podcast. Welcome to the Digital Executive. Today's guest is Adam Auctor. Adam Auctor is the founder and CEO of Transparency and the Bunk Police, leading test kit innovation and educational outreach in the harm reduction industry, which is a hybrid for-profit and nonprofit entity. Auctor is a creative visionary, investigative filmmaker, and harm reduction activist in the drug use space. Well, good afternoon, Adam. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
Appreciate you jumping on. I know you're out on the East Coast there in North Carolina, me in Kansas City. So I always like to, it's kind of my focal point of the day every day is getting on and meeting somebody new. So I appreciate it and appreciate you jumping on. So Adam, jumping into your first question, can you tell us about the origin of the Bunk Police and what inspired you to focus on harm reduction and test kit innovation in the drug use space?
Right. Yeah. So, we've been doing this for about 13 years, and the idea first came to me while I was in college. So I noticed that some of the people around me were taking specifically MDMA or ecstasy and having drastically different effects from what I had read should happen. And so, I looked into some options as far as, trying to tell what exactly it was that they were taking, because I knew it was something different. And come to find out after using some police supply test kits that I ordered from, a forensic website that's, for official use only. They sent them to me anyways. Come to find out it was actually bath salts or synthetic cathinones that these people were taking. And so that really sparked an interest in me in, what else is going on in the drug market. So I started traveling to music festivals and doing testing for free just to kind of uncover everything else that was going on. And I found that, a very large majority of the MDMA at that time was bath salts. There were also significant issues with every other substance on the market, LSD, ketamine, cocaine, all of that. And so, we went from that moment to, hiring a chemist, and actually ended up dropping out of business school in order to pursue this idea. And, we started developing test kits. And so we went from our first, test kit that year to now we have, about, 11 different types of test kits and, over 10,000 hours of research in the field.
That's amazing. I appreciate you taking the time to delve into this a little bit more there might be a lot of information out there, but it may not always be correct or accurate. And the fact that you went in and started to do some deeper dive into the research is really appreciated, because there's a lot of people that are struggling with addiction and health problems because of some of the substances out there. So I appreciate that, Adam. Adam, with test kits being a key innovation for harm reduction, what have been some of the most significant advancements in testing technology, and how have they impacted your work?
Sure. Yeah. There are two main advancements that have come along since we started. And, the first and probably most impactful is just the application of antibody-based test strips for detecting substances. And, previously they had been used mostly to aid in urinalysis tests. So, being able to test somebody for, employment or probation or something like that. And around 2017, we started to realize that they could also be used in order to test substances before people purchase them. And they are just incredibly accurate and sensitive, down to, in some cases, the picogram, which is 1/1000th of a gram. So that's been a huge thing for us. We've applied that specifically to fentanyl. And fentanyl is such a powerful substance and is usually found in such minute amounts that, these things have really changed the game as far as detecting that specifically, and, other substances as well, like xylazine and a few others that have come into the market since then. And the other advancement that we've seen is, in the application of a pretty well-known technique called thin layer chromatography. And, we really base our efforts on enabling people to test their substances at home themselves in a private environment and be as accurate as possible in doing so. And so this thin layer chromatography method allows people to separate out mixed substances. So if you were to have, say, cocaine and caffeine and, methamphetamine all in one sample, you would be able to separate those out, test them individually, and then also quantify them, and essentially being able to tell how much of each is in your sample. And that's just been a very powerful tool for our customers.
I appreciate you delving into that a little bit more for our audience. fentanyl is one of the biggest challenges here in this country, as you know. And I really like the fact that you can test down to that micro level. And I can't remember what you said, petagram, but
Program.
yeah, that's just awesome. And I appreciate the work that you're doing because we're trying to make the world a better place and get people back and healthy. I appreciate that. And Adam, you've also positioned yourself as an investigative filmmaker. How do you blend filmmaking and harm reduction activism to raise awareness about the risk associated with drug use?
Right. So, some of these problems are relatively unbelievable, especially to the people that are affected by them. And so, we really need to show them firsthand what's happening on the ground level. And so that has come into play with two different documentaries that we've released over the years. The first was called What's in My Baggie. And we, essentially went to events and mostly music events and did just, a ton of testing, in people's campsites and around the grounds of music festivals and whatnot. And, we're able to capture their reaction to the results in real time. And, that kind of added, not just information about how bad the problem is, but also let our audience see just like, the human problem as well and how shocking it can be to, receive these results. And yeah, it was just very, very impactful in that moment. The second documentary that we've put out, and we have several additional ones planned in 2025. So it kind of focused on a different aspect of the drug market. And that was specifically cartel-run pharmacies in Mexico. And so, the Mexican cartels have kind of infiltrated many different systems in Mexico. And they've taken over many pharmacies as well, to the point where they are selling fentanyl instead of, prescription painkillers, and, also methamphetamine instead of prescription ADHD medication like Adderall. And so we were able to go down there with hidden cameras and, show the interaction between myself and these pharmacists. And, also take the samples that we acquired during that time and send them to our laboratory for, advanced analysis. And what we uncovered was absolutely shocking. As it turns out, the majority of the oxycodone samples down there are actually fentanyl or fentanyl and xylazine. And we did find that every single one of the ADHD medication samples, specifically Adderall, they were methamphetamine. And so, that's just really eye-opening to our audience because, these are in many cases licensed pharmacies. And this effort had a large part in having 54 of these pharmacies shut down by the Mexican Navy in Mexico. So we're pretty proud of that.
That's amazing. I love these stories where people, and again, I know it's not always a great place to travel sometimes in some of these areas, but for you to go out, have the courage, build this documentary so that you can educate the public. I think that's awesome. And obviously we're going to save lives that way as well. So appreciate that. And Adam, last question of the day. The Bunk Police has a strong focus on safety at music festivals and events. How do you see the role of festival organizers evolving in the future with regard to harm reduction efforts?
Right. Well, that's actually a pretty complex question. So this is something that we've been dealing with for years. The event promoters and production companies have a bunch of, very intricate hurdles to overcome in allowing test kits and harm reduction at their events. There are legal hurdles. There's a piece of legislation called the RAVE Act that has been a big issue for us along the way. And, it more or less indicates that if you allow a drug involved premises, allow, drug dealers and drug users to operate on your premises, that's, you can be charged with crimes beyond just, the possession or distribution of drugs, all the way up to property seizure, very large fines. And that can be applied not just to the promoters and the production companies, but also to anybody that works at the event. And so, this piece of legislation was passed back in 2002 and has only been applied, one or two times over the years. But these production companies and promoters are just scared to death that it's going to happen to them. But as we're seeing, fentanyl test strips specifically being distributed by the federal government and also state level agencies en masse to the tune of millions and millions of these things being given away for free, the way that the government looks at these sorts of events and looks at communities that are drug involved, such as music festivals or, homeless communities and whatnot, has changed drastically. And so we are making a documentary this next year. We've started filming already that specifically talks about this issue and what we need to do in order to amend or repeal the Rave Act to allow promoters to more easily allow these things to be at their events. And so, beyond that, there are also issues when it comes to liability, and insurance and whatnot. And so we're also addressing those hurdles as well and trying to, work with the production companies to figure out what other issues that they faced along the way, so that we can come to some sort of an agreement where they can, at the very least, allow the vendors that come to these events to carry testing products. And at the most, we would love to follow in the footsteps of other countries such as Canada and Portugal and the UK and have actual laboratories set up at these events where people can bring their substance, have it tested, and get the results there in real time. That is the eventual goal. And believe it or not, behind closed doors, that is already happening in many places in the US. It's just difficult for it to be done publicly.
Wow. That's just amazing. I appreciate you making these efforts, getting the word out there. And I know that there's a huge culture that we obviously have to change, and this is not something you can do overnight, but I think it's so important that there's more awareness brought to it. And then, of course, the safety aspect of it. So I really, really do appreciate everything we talked about today, Adam, truly do. And Adam, it was such a pleasure having you on today, and I look forward to speaking with you real soon.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Bye for now.